So the global financial system is under attack again. BRICS is chipping away at the dollar and now they're doing it in the debt markets. This is a bold move because it is striking deep at the growth engine of America itself. They are challenging the dominance of the dollar bond market, and this will be a colossal affair. They will take a long time to manifest, but the global south is taking steps to break away from being reliant on Western money. And in our lead story today, BRICS Bank strives to reduce reliance on the dollar. The Shanghai-based lender moves to become a bank made by developing countries for developing countries. The new development bank is moving to start lending money outside of the US dollar. And this is a big move because the world relies on dollar debt to function. It's not just the US Treasury or American companies issuing bonds denominated in dollars. Many countries as well issue debt in a reserve currency, and that keeps them trapped in the system. And let's just use the US Treasury market for example. It is over $25 trillion strong, and the market is bigger than all other G7 bond markets plus China combined together. And that acts as a big sink for investment. Everyone, even today, is still buying US bonds because rates are going up, and it is implicitly guaranteed by the Federal Reserve. If anything goes wrong, the Fed will simply monetize the debt and print money to inflate it away. And because there's so much money entering the US bond market, capital flows away from the emerging markets, and that keeps borrowing costs for America low, and it allows them to grow faster than the rest of the world. And listen to what Dilma Rousseff, the head of the BRICS Bank, had to say. Local currencies are alternatives to a system. So far, the system has been unipolar. It's going to be substituted by a more multipolar system. Since the 1970s or even earlier, the world has only known the unipolar dollar system, and it was working quite fine until America started to abuse the privilege by excessive borrowing, money printing, and of course, weaponizing. So it shouldn't be a surprise that countries are trying to break out from under it, right? And you'll quickly understand why. Now, it's important to understand the objective here. The euro dollar system and the debt markets can't be broken anytime soon, right? It has grown too monstrous and its size dwarfs our imagination. Remember the $25 trillion treasury market? That is just debt issued by the US government. It is just a fraction of the entire euro dollar debt market, which is dollar denominated debt issued outside of the United States. And according to estimates, there's $65 trillion worth of unrecorded dollar debt circulating around the global financial system. And these are loans issued by non-US banks and shadow banks. It's almost two-thirds of global GDP. So you can kind of imagine how addicted and reliant the world is to the dollar system. But the question you probably have is, why do countries and companies keep borrowing in the US dollar? And the answer is very simple. They don't have much of a choice because the dollar is the reserve currency and almost everything is priced in it. The dollar is accepted everywhere. And that means the world is swimming in dollars. If you borrow in dollars, you get to access more capital and you lower your borrowing costs. And let me put it simply, if you are an investor and I force you to invest in Argentine bonds, would you buy the one priced in US dollars or the one in pesos? And if we pull up the chart of the peso versus the dollar, the answer is ultra obvious. Buying dollar denominated bonds makes more sense because you cut away any currency risk. The peso has dropped 99% to the dollar. No amount of bond yield can defend against that. And this is why countries issue a ton of debt in US dollars. They are trying to lure in more investors by cutting away the currency risk. And this next chart will reveal how much this addiction to dollars really is. We can see in the cross-border loans and international debt securities, almost 50% of issuance is in US dollars. That means at least half of the time, when countries issue debt outside of their local currency, they do it in greenbacks. So countries are kind of caught in a dilemma. If we issue in dollars, we can borrow money cheaper. But if we do, we are caught in the dollar system. We are trapped in the matrix. And what the BRICS Bank is trying to challenge is this. They want to give the world, especially the emerging markets, an alternative system, a fighting chance to break away. And here's what they are planning to do. We expect to lend between 8 billion to 10 billion this year. Our aim is to reach around 30% of everything we lend in local currency. So the BRICS Bank plans to issue more loans in the Chinese yuan, the Indian rupee, and the South African rand, all in local currencies outside of the dollar. But doesn't make sense. If the dollar has so many perks, what is the point of the world breaking away from the legacy system, right? You might as well just stick to it. And it's because of two big reasons. Each one is mission critical enough to find an alternative away from the established order. And the first is ultra obvious. The BRICS wants to help emerging markets grow and compete better with the developed Western world. And to do that, they need access to capital. Now, back in 2009, the West promised the emerging markets $100 billion per year by 2020 to fight the impacts of climate change. And this was an important promise to help poorer countries adapt their economies and protect their communities. But fast forward to today, African countries are calling it a shameful failure to meet the financing promises. They want the West to honor their $100 billion climate pledge. Now, the developed world has dropped the funding down to $40 billion by 2025, and this is nothing when the amount of funding will snowball to $300 billion annually by 2030. And can Africa and the emerging nations wait for so long? And this is where the BRICS Bank comes into play. They are looking to provide funding to the global south to quickly develop their economies. And that's why lending in local currency is just so important. You just can't sit around and wait for charity from the West, right? You have to do it yourself. In a story from Bloomberg, the BRICS Bank raises $79 million in South Africa bond sale. The bonds were priced in South African rand and the money is being used to build infrastructure projects. But what's important here is that the bond sale was oversubscribed. And that means there's more demand than supply of the bonds, which is a good thing. It shows that international investors are actually eager to invest outside of the dollar system. They just need the avenue. And check this out. The BRICS Bank issued 1.5 billion rand worth of bonds, but it attracted 2.67 billion worth of bids. That's almost double the supply of bonds. So we can expect BRICS to keep raising funds outside of the dollar system. And it's good news because it helps the world to diversify and de-risk themselves from the West just in case the unthinkable happens. For emerging economies, issuing bonds in local currencies also gives a critical advantage. It goes beyond just raising more capital. Remember the currency crisis back in 2022? When the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, it triggered a huge dollar shortage across the world, especially in the emerging markets. Bangladesh, for example, is struggling to buy fuel because of a dollar shortage. Egypt also ran into a deadly dollar crunch where they didn't have enough currency for their imports. And this is the real risk of issuing bonds in US dollars. When you borrow in the reserve currency, you eventually need to pay back in that same exact currency. So there's this constant scramble for dollars. And normally it would be fine if interest rates are low and the economy is growing. But because the Federal Reserve is hiking and global demand is slowing, getting those dollars become increasingly difficult. And this is where the BRICS Bank comes in to fill the gap. The developing countries need an outlet to borrow money outside of the matrix, right? Here's what the bank said. Now we start thinking seriously to use one member country's currency to finance projects with that currency in another member. For example, a project in South Africa to be financed in Chinese yuan and not with dollars. And this is important because it allows countries to preserve their dollars for trade. They don't need to double dip into their reserves to settle bond payments and then to import stuff as well. And this prevents any horrible currency devaluation and panic buying into dollars. So the BRICS Bank isn't really trying to dethrone the dollar system, but to offer a powerful alternative for the developing world. Here's another way to raise money without collapsing your economy if things turn really bad. Now, raising money is one thing, but another reason why the BRICS Bank will grow is because of Western sanctions. And you would think that the bank is totally independent of the West, right? BRICS Bank has nothing to do with the West, but that isn't true. That is not the case. They still operate under the dollar system. And back in 2022, the BRICS Bank was forced to stop loans to Russia as part of the sanctions. And if they didn't, they would be cut away from the dollar system. But that didn't stop a downgrade in July 2022 from the ratings agency Fitch. And this caused their dollar borrowing cost to fly up. And that's why there's a big motivation for the bank to move away from the current financial system. As long as they keep issuing loans in dollars, their movements and even their borrowing costs, their interest rates will be influenced and controlled by the West. And this means growth for the emerging markets will be restricted to a certain degree. So this push towards local currency lending is going to continue. It will start off as a trickle, but it will slowly gain momentum over time. And there's a reason why many countries are looking to join the BRICS Bank. Saudi Arabia is looking to join the bank in addition to full membership in the bloc. The UAE has also been a member since 2021, and most recently, Egypt has also joined the bank as well. And the answer is simple: they want to grow independently outside of the system. We're already seeing the Emirates actually trading oil for rupees with India. Then you also have the Saudis dumping their treasury bonds to a 6-year low. They have essentially sold over 40% of their holdings over the past 3 years. It has gone down from over $180 billion to 110 billion. And that is a significant drop we can't ignore. But they can't totally deleverage until they find an alternative source of funding outside of dollars. And as we speak, the Saudis are still borrowing money in the reserve currency, raising $6 billion in their latest issuance. And that's why we keep saying on this channel that the dollarization will take some time. It won't happen in a year or even 10 years. And the process is very complicated. It's going to be very painful. And it's not just about buying and selling commodities outside of the dollar. We must also consider the debt markets as well. And debt is the strongest chain in the link to break. Remember that the global dollar debt market is $65 trillion strong. So it's not really about winning, guys, but carving out a niche to diversify away. And guess which country is next in line to benefit? It's going to be none other than India. In a report, the BRICS Bank is planning to issue its first rupee bond by October. And this is good news for India because they can now borrow in their own local currency, the rupee. And this allows them to reduce reliance on the dollar, protect their imports, and strengthen the rupee. So you can see why countries are looking to join the BRICS and their bank. And there's really no downsides and only upside. Getting to borrow money in your own local currency is one advantage that allowed America to really grow so fast. And now the emerging economies want that advantage for themselves. You sanction proof yourself, you aren't vulnerable to US monetary policy, and you can build your economy up with less currency risk. Does this mean the dollar system will crumble tomorrow? No. But this is another sign that the world is moving away from the established order. 2022 has been a real wake up call, guys. The world might not be overtly challenging the dollar, but they are making moves to slowly drift away. And this might surprise you, but I personally think the biggest concern isn't really the dollar sanctions. Now, that is bad, but the real problem I see is endless borrowing from Congress. US Treasury yields have hit a 16-year high of 4.35%. The bond market is selling off because Janet Yellen is dumping a ton of treasuries into the market. And this is jacking up the cost of borrowing for the whole world and is making the dollar shortage even worse. America can run endless deficits, but the emerging markets can't because they still borrow in dollars. And we will likely see more capital flee countries all over the world towards the United States. And that in turn will keep the US economy on top at the expense of everyone else. And this is how the global economy is really structured. This is the legacy financial system. So the BRICS Bank trying to challenge the dollar matrix is bound to happen sooner or later. It's a backlash against the establishment. And down the road, we'll eventually reach a point where the global south will be able to fund themselves. Then fireworks will really happen. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Will the BRICS Bank succeed? And which country is next to join the bank? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.